Okay, we're going to pick back up and start on page 365 in your book. And some of the things we're going to start with is the relationships that in very late adulthood. And some things I want to point out to you about relationships that are very in very late adulthood is one, there's an increased likelihood of having a lost partner, friend, child, or family member. So we know that as people continue to grow old, that there's an increased risk where they may have lost a spouse, a family, and friends. So, and I'm gonna share some personal things with you related to what my grandmother shared with me. Also, siblings often provide companionship and caregivers. You remember it growing up and we were talking about adolescent and childhood that the first friends are siblings and most time so now back now in the late stages of life we see where siblings often provide companionship and caregiving to their loved ones and their family and friends and as you think about this, think about your families. Are the older adult, are their siblings living, and what does that relationship look like? Does it look like they are trying to make sure that that person is okay? What does it look like? And third, women generally have fewer economic resources but more social resources. And I wonder if you thought about that, wonder why is that? Um, One possible reason is that men, back in that era time, worked outside the home. Some women stayed in the home and did not work as much and had a bigger social network than the men. They had more of an economic. So those are some things to ponder and think about. So now, as we continue on page 365, there's a few things I want you to make sure that you know, and they are: individuals continue to desire and need connections to other people throughout their life. I've done a lot of community work and going and visiting the nursing homes and doing things and doing holiday time and different times. You're seeing a lot of organizations wanting to do something for those who are left in the nursing home. Now I want you to understand the sense of feeling abandonment can still take place in older adults. So it's important as a social worker, as you're beginning to, especially if you're going to be going into gerontology and you have working with elderly people, there's a sense of abandonment, that they are alienated from their families. And thinking about this COVID, you see all the different signs that people are putting up and doing things so that they can stay connected. So despite the chronological age, there's still a need to feel connected. um, you do have increased depression sometimes with elderly people at this age because a lot their parents, their children, or may not be living, or their spouse may be deceased, or they have their children still may be working. So there's not a lot of family time or time to that. So that's very important to them. And then also very late life adult interact with others less frequently. Um, is it because they're not able to drive anymore? So their social connect, even though they have a big social resources, but they may not be able to connect with them as often as someone who is still able to drive. Now, you remember, we're talking about people 85 years and older. Now, and also remember that the chronological age does not mean despair. A lot of times when they get to the point where they're homebound and things, it's more related to health issues and all that come with the health issues. Another thing to look at is the combination of older. There's a combination of older age and disability limitations account for diminishing social network. Basically, their age, and then like I said just previously, some health concerns. But if you will, look here on your book. On that page 365, you can find that, and just understand that there's a need for connection. Sometimes they're not connected due to health issues, age issues, disability, and then also the family sometimes have other obligations outside of being a primary caregiver. But understand that relationship is equally important. Okay. And back to, there's an increased likelihood, that they don't have a partner or someone with them. Now, relationships with family and friends. I want to say this to you, if you and it's here on your in your book, um, on page 365 also. But just know this part. It's on your PowerPoint, so you just make sure you pay attention. Social isolation is a risk factor. Now you remember we talked about, because a lot of times some of them may be homebound, some may be living at home alone. Um, their spouse may be gone, their children may be living out of state. There's a whole lot of factors. So there may be a social isolation, not because they want it, because so many people live busy lives. And just think about grandparents and great grandparents, and think about people who are no longer maintaining those connections because of health issues, or because of age, or because of many factors. Just know it's important when you're going to be assessing people who fall in this category, that you got to consider that emotional and mental feeling of social isolation. Not everybody may feel that, but that is one particular risk factor that you want to look at. Loss is most prevalent during this stage. A loss is most prevalent during this stage because a lot of people may not have died, or they may have a sense of again, we're talking 85 and older, so that a lot of people longevity and livelihood may not be where they are. So there may be a sense of loneliness. I'm gonna say this: I never could understand this, but I understand. I didn't understand it then, because it was more. I was more. It was personal for me. But thinking back about those conversations with my grandmother, I remember she would tell me. She said, "Oh, I'm so all alone," and we used to spoil her rotten, going to the nursing homes and going to talk to her and visiting and taking her to go to Sonic's and get her a pineapple milkshake, and those were the good times. And she would tell me, "I'm so lonely." She said, "Honey, I don't have any friends. Everybody I know gone." And I couldn't understand it, because I thought we were important. But remember, during the journey of life, during the peers are always important. And even at that stage of development, peers are, we talked about the adolescent stage and middle adulthood, where the people and their peers are so important. And that doesn't change just because they get older. And that was hard for me to understand. And so as a social worker, you may have to, when you're working with those families, and their caregivers is complaining about feeling lonely and nobody around. And now, it's not that they don't care, but the people that they can relate to and they can understand. So that's hard, but I mean that's a part of a life. Siblings may be strong source of support. We said that earlier. I also mentioned that relationships with adult children are important. They become, the relationship with their adult children become like two adult relationship. And I think that's important. But their relationship with their kids are important. And now just imagine parents whose children are estranged, and they don't have their children, knowing that their parent-child relationship is important. But if it's estranged, they can't get out. They don't have the support from, they don't have a strong support. Then you can see where there's an increased risk for depression and social isolation. So just make note of that. Okay. Now we're gonna move in on to this intimacy and sexuality in the very late adulthood. Let me say this. I had an opportunity in my younger before pre-social work days. I worked in a nursing home, and if any of you ever worked in a nursing home, you know that there are times when we had to make sure. There were times when the men and women were still wanting to be intimate, and sometimes even I don't know what was going on, but we there was often times that patients were, we had to watch, and we had to be aware that there were some patients who still had that desire to be intimate with their with someone or significant other. And that still happens. So as we explore this right here, these are some things that I want you to notice in here. Women generally more alone in this life stage that than in any other time. You know, when it comes to intimacy, it said that women generally more alone in this life stage than any other time. So I want you to remember that. And there's women are alone at this stage now, because remember, women centurion outlive men, so there's a lot of men are no longer there. But when we're talking about intimacy, it's not the intimacy and sexuality that probably you find in young adult or middle adult or late adult, but we're talking about a different. And I want you to know these. Turn to your book on page 367, and we're going to discuss all of these, and you're going to need to know these. And there are 5 of them, and so I'm gonna break them each down to you. But you also reference your book. They're here in your book. But there's a commitment, feeling of cohesion and connection. That's a form of intimacy, commitment. That feeling that they are connected to somebody, or there's a connection. And so that's very important in this stage of development. And then you have effective intimacy, and that is a deep sense of caring, compassion, and positive regard in the opportunities to express the same. Now, I'm going to go back over this. Effective intimacy. It's in your book, but I want you to make sure on page 367, a deep sense of caring, compassion, and positive regard for an opportunity to express that. So, you need to be aware that, just because someone is late in adulthood, very late, does not mean that they don't desire to give love and to receive love, and have an effective intimacy. Then you have a cognitive intimacy, and that's thinking about and awareness of another, sharing values and goals. So it looks a whole lot different than the intimacy and sexuality in other stages of development. So I want you to be aware of that and know that. If you would turn now to your book on page 368, you will find physical intimacy. This is also including your PowerPoint, but it's just listed. So I want you to go back to your book so that you can have the definition, because you'll need to know that. Physical intimacy is sharing a physical encounter ranging from proximity to sexuality. So, there's a desire for that for people at this stage of development as well. Okay? And then mutuality is a process of exchange or interdependence. That interdependence, interconnectedness, just a mutual process of exchange. And sometimes I seriously, I didn't know this until someone told me that sometimes people even take out ads in the paper looking for companionship, looking for someone, just to spend their time with. So, we know that is very important for older adults, very late adulthood, over 85. So, and again, because people are living longer, there's more research. The research is pretty fresh on this. So it's as people continue to live longer, there's going to be more research and data to really to go into this. So just know that there's a desire. Just because someone is old does not mean, or older, or chronologically a certain age, does not mean that they don't have the desire for intimacy and sexuality. However, it does not look like it did young and earlier in life, like in adolescent, young adult, middle adulthood. So, but just know that is still possible. Okay? Now, I want you to look with me. We're going on to the next slide. But one of the things I want to add to this, something that you have, I want to go back. Women generally are more alone in this life stage. There are 5 components of intimacy. And then the third thing we need to point out, There are barriers to meet one's sexual desire, such as low interest in sex or loss of partner. Sometimes they may have a desire, but they may have what they call low libido, that they don't, it's just, they're just a low interest in sex. That's just not there, and it could be for many reasons. It could be because there are just barriers to it. It could be health barriers, because health, not their ability or inability to perform. But there are barriers to people in this age to even being able to connect, even if they decided or chose, if they chose to have a more physical, intimate relationship. There may be barriers to that, which could be the low, the desire, as well as the interest in not having a partner to have that with. Okay, so now let's go on to our next slide, and we're going to move on to, hold on for a second. So relationships with organizations, and you can find that part on page 368 in your book. And again, I like to keep telling you, if there's any time in this chapter or book that you need clarity, please do not hesitate to contact me, because guess what? You got this. You are going to be great. Okay? You have overcome day one of COVID until this point. So remember that, okay? I just want you to know that. Now let's look at on page 368. Two things I want to point out to you in this chapter, in this portion of our studies, so that you'll kind of know, and you can just read over there, is that community-based programs can be important resources. Now, only here I mentioned Meals on Wheels. However, there's another, they call it the Medicaid waiver program, and those are home and community-based programs that are designed to allow people to stay at home as long as possible. Now, of course, the government uses it because it's cheaper to do that than to put them in an institutional care. But home and community-based programs allow people to remain autonomous at home. It also allows people to stay at home and have their right to self-determination. They can remain at home, and then they can provide, what they do is provide assistance with the IADLs. And remember what that is: instrumental activities of daily living. And those things are important, but not necessary, in life, but it is important to be able to do those. And then your ADLs, that's activities of daily living. Now, there's here in our area, you have I know you have the PDDs, the Planning and Development District. They are the ones that typically, that I'm aware of, that provides home and community-based service. And I know that there's one in Prentice County, PDD. Can't remember the name of, but it's the PDDs. They're all across the state. They are providing home and community-based service, which is based on, it's based on Medicaid, but they also have, and they provide like Meals on Wheels, homemaker services. They also provide assistance with homemaker service, and that includes someone helping them with their IADLs, and also someone helping them with the ADLs. So that is a very good program, very interesting. And guess what? They usually hire social workers and a nurse team. So that's, if you're interested in social gerontology, that would be a good resource. Now, the Lee County, the multipurpose building here in Lee County, they also offer places for elderly, or people to have free meals and an opportunity to connect with other people of their age or peers. So there are resources available, and so out there. And then of course you have some nonprofit, and then you have some profit organizations who provide services. Now the profit organization, now you have a lot of adult daycare programs, assisted living homes that provide services, so that people can maintain that home life versus going into an institutional, like a nursing home. So you have the institutional care. Here, community-based programs such as Meals on Wheels can become important resources. And there's an increased likelihood at this stage of development that institutional care may be your only option that you can have. And again, that's dependent on a person's health. You know, how healthy are they, or how their abilities and versus disabilities or their medical diagnosis. So kind of know that, okay? Now we're gonna move on. The use of technology. There are 2 points I want to point out. It's also on your PowerPoint, and that is also found on page 368 in your book. There, at this age now, I want you to remember, at this age now, there's a very, and this age starts at 85, there's a small percentage access to the internet. There's a very small percentage of people this age using the internet. There's an increased communication within social groups, which allows them to maintain long distance relationship and increase access to health information. Now, I'm gonna say that again because I was kind of choppy with that. The use of technology. There's an increased communication within social groups, allows maintenance of long distance relationships, and increased access to health information. Now, you remember we were talking about like these home and community based program, and also we were talking about daycare programs, adult daycare programs, assisted living houses. They provide resources and information so people can feel connected. Now, there's a very small percentage of people in this age group that is using the internet, okay? And if so, that you will have those who are more, with a higher education, those with a higher socioeconomic status. So we know again that class plays a lot of part in your ability to access services. Now we've talked about that before, all throughout the lifespan. That access, being able to connect and have that, plays a critical part on people's connection. Now, those with the higher education, those who are higher socioeconomic status, or even their families can provide exposure to the internet versus people who don't. Those individuals who don't, they rely on home and community-based services, free services, even spiritual churches provide information. I know that I've gone to different churches and spoke at different churches, and they have I guess programs for older adults to come together, and they have a guest speaker to come in, to provide them information. So there are all kind of ways that people have access to information that is prevalent to what they're going through. And then again, they are less likely at age 85 and but less likely to use the internet, unable to obtain computer or other device. Some of them may not have, a lot of times people may be on a fixed income, and they may not just spend that money on that. And then another, their cognitive, perceptional, and motor skills deficit, in their vision impairment. They may not be able to see it. They may not be able, may be intimidated by all these computers and all these devices. So they may not be able to use it because of those factors. So there may not be as many using that. But again, look at your PowerPoint, and then I gave you 2 additional things I want you to say. That there's a small percent of 85 and older population who uses their internet. Also, there's the increased communication via some social groups to get information. Okay, now I want us to move on to on page 369 in the housing continuum. This is something that is very, very important. Because elderly people want to maintain that sense of being at home versus being in an institution. And we can understand that. Make me think about Dorothy. There's no place like home. And, and one of the hardest things is that making a decision to move your loved ones from, from their home to a nursing home or to a place that requires additional 24-hour care. So there are some points I want to make, 2 points, but first let's look at the PowerPoint. The future housing option trends. There are more people at this age shared houses and expenses and they are supported by family and friends. Adaptable housing designs, to meet those who may have some physical challenges that may prevent them. Like you can have the the bars that help, in the toilet or in the bathroom. You even have light switches or bells. There are all kind of devices that can be made so that people can stay safely in their homes and maintain their autonomy to live by themselves. Care and assistance in home with education and support available to informal caregivers. There are people that can provide additional support to family, and then there may be some independent living facility. Now, one of the things about the independent living facility, they have what they call skilled care, and then they have immediate care. Now, skilled care, the person may require 24 hours, 7 days a week care for everything with their feeding, even with changing and their bowel and bladder, and where there's some, they have step down units where people can live in a elderly community, like Tracewell Manor nursing home. People, they got individual apartment complex, but then as a person health declines, and then they may go to the next unit. So there are different housing continuums that you need to be made aware of. Now, look on page 369. There's a current trends indicate that in the future the following housing options will be a greater demand and hopefully more readily available. I want you to look at that. There's 7 of them, and look at those, and you want to read them. I'm not gonna go over all of them with you, but I'll give you a few, and I want you to look at assisted living facilities with 24-hour assistance. We kind of briefly talked about that. Nursing homes provide only custodial care. And there are some. There's a growing population. Like right now, let me just tell y'all this. Those assisted living houses where there's not really a lot of mandate on them. You see them popping up everywhere. I bet if I took a poll right now and ask you how many of you have seen an increase of assisted living homes, or just personal care homes, they pop up, because right now there's not a lot of regulation on there, but there's a lot of income in that. And then as we progress, as older people are living, and then we think about people sexuality and sexual preference, then there's going to have to be there's a need moving forward. Now we're talking about, you remember in 2050, I think it said by 2050 we're going to have 19 million people over the age of 85. So there's gonna have to be places that will be friendly toward the LGBTQ community. So there's a housing continuum. There's a need there, and these are on territory need areas. So there may be an interest there. But 2 other things: financing is a major problem for low to middle income people and women, especially women of color. I'm gonna read that to you again. Financing is a major problem for low to middle income people in general, and women, especially women of color. Now, you go back to your cultural understanding, where in the past, during this decade, in this era, African American women, they worked in the home. They raised children. They also raised other people's children. So therefore, their income, they didn't make the economic income. They didn't have the money. So they are more likely to be, at a financial disadvantage than their counterparts. And that's quite interesting. But now, as you think, as the baby boomers are getting older, then that trend may even possibly change, because you have more African American women who are educated and who have insurance. And so that, again, Remember what we said at the beginning. This is an ongoing research, and there's a people are living longer and seeing that. Then I said this later. Two important things I wanted to point out now. There's a greater demand for more flexible housing options, and we look on page 369. You look at those different options, such as LGBTQ friendly options and adaptable housing designs. And so we talked about that. But now the two things I want you to remember: financing is a major problem for low to middle income people and women, especially women of color. You need to know that, okay? That's important. You need to know this because when you're going out and assessing and working with it, you need to understand that, and that is supported by research, okay? Again, that's on page 369. Y'all, we almost done. Hang in there. We're at the very last chapter of this book. And I know you're ready. And I know you're ready for a wonderful summer break. And I know you're ready to relax. Hang in there. Just keep hanging in there. But this is some good stuff. I got some good stuff. Good stuff. Okay? Now, I want to talk to you, and I want to share something very, very special with you as we talk about this. But turn to page 370 in your book. And we're going to talk about, I want to make reference to your PowerPoint, and then there's a few things I want to talk to you about. Spirituality in the very late adulthood, okay? There's decreased mobility, independence, and social contact can lead to focus on their spirituality. And that's where people find a place of peace. We talked about accessing a place of peace. Well, when someone gets in over 85, they're not able to go like they used to. They're more independent on other. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry about that. But there's a decreased mobility. Then there's an independence, and a social contact may lead to them, depending on something higher than a greater power. And just think about, as you read these lessons and go through this, I want you to think about your loved ones. How are they? Where do they fall on this spectrum? Where do they fall on in all this discussion? And it'll help you. And then some of them, begin to search for meaning in life. What is it? What have I done? They may not express that, but they thinking, search for meaning. And what does that look like? Another thing is, what am I after? They just say, who am I? What type of impact did I leave? And then spirituality is not just about preparing for death. It's about their life review. I'm just sitting here thinking about my grandfather, and I remember when he was over 100 years old, and he was still in his mind, and until cancer struck his body. I think when he was 103, and he died at 104. And we used to talk about the things that he really enjoyed doing, and he used to say this all the time. He said, the things that I know how to do, I did them well, and the things that I didn't know how to do, I just didn't know how to do, and that's why I can get some help. And that's kind of been my motto. If the things that I know how to do, and I'm going to tell you that the things that you know how to do them well. The things that you don't know how to do, get some help, and then you can and you never lose like that. But look on page 370. Then they talk about life review and spirituality. Okay, here we go. This is important. Take notes of this. Let me see. Okay, yeah. This is some good stuff, y'all. Okay. Spirituality and very latehood. There's an increased loss accumulates in the following areas, and you're gonna find that on page 371. You're gonna need to know this, okay? So, we know that at this age group that they have a lot of loss. So there's gonna be loss that accumulate in the four areas. There's relationship loss, And this includes like their children, their spouses, their partners, and their friends. And it could even be something that they value and look at life. It could be pets, something very important. But they have a great sense of loss. There's a lot of loss. But then that's why it's so important. You remember we talked about earlier, having those connections. And then the status in role, they have a loss in their status. You know, at first they were independent. They can do the things that they wanted to do. But now there's a loss in their roles and abilities, what they can do. They may have used to been a grandmother who babysit her children, or they may used to have been a cook, or they did things they could drive and take care of, but now they have to have drivers, they have to have somebody playing them in. So that's a loss. So I don't want you to think about loss just in the sense of death and dying, but you know, those things that are at a loss that they no longer can enjoy and do, and you have to count those down. And guess what? People will grieve those types of losses that you don't think that that's important as a provider and a social worker to know that loss is not necessarily death. Okay, a loss status in their family, their work, and society. You know, so look at those, and again, that's on page 371 in your book, and I want you to look at that. And then the health. You know, the health is another loss, and that's in stamina. Their, you know, just their ability to get their mobility to move around, their hearing, vision, and other physical and cognitive function. So there's a loss. That's a loss. You know, a loss of hearing, a loss of vision, a loss of stamina. You know, not just being able to get up, not able to go, and then a loss of control and independence. You know, people making decisions for them. I think one of the biggest, you remember I told y'all in class, you know, when I first started working in home and community, I had that woman, and I just thought, I assumed because she was elderly, and you can't never make assumptions. And I was just speaking very loudly and yelling to her, and she was just looking at me like, oh, like she was looking at me like she didn't know what was that in her house. And she said, honey, I'm old, but I can hear. So then society looks at them and like they've lost, and you know, so it's important to ask, you know, what's your name? What do you want to be called? You know, so that they can still have a sense of control of who they are. And then a control and independence in their financing, housing, health care, and other decision making. That's kind of taken away from them. Again, you can find that on 370 in your book. So know that. Now, when we're talking about this, there, you know, remember I said that there's an increase in focus on spirituality, such as, increased focus on spirituality as mobility, independence, and social contacts decrease. So remember, you know, as they stop moving and being, sociable, there's an increase in their spirituality. Now, think about Erikson theories, and we're going back into the theories. You know, I love them theories. Let's get back into this one, okay? At this stage of development, you're going to have ego integrity versus ego despair. And we do not want our interactions to make our clients feel despair. So let's always respect and ask. That's important. So one's ego, integrity, and despair, one's ability to process what has happened in life and accept those experiences as integral meaning of their life. And at this time, if I can find it, I have always been, they come to this process in life where they're okay with things, and you remember they have a lot of laws. And so as social workers, you want to come in and you want the opportunity to ask them and get their input on how they're feeling about something. Make sure you do that, because you know they feel that ego, integrity, you know, and then the despair, and we don't want ever to cause anyone to do it. And then their life review. Now I want you to go on to page, and I'm hoping the dying process. And as we talk about this dying process, I don't even know why I'm feeling a little emotional. But I mean, I still got my grandmom, and she's deceased now. But I will forever hold her in my heart. I don't know if you ever noticed. I am the oldest. I am the first grandchild. I am the oldest first. My grandmom had all boys. I'm the first granddaughter, so she was like another mom to me. I don't know if y'all ever paid attention to this ring that I wear on my finger. That was her mother's ring, and I got that, and we were very, very, very close. And so the relationship was, and thinking about application of what the knowledge I have that's in my toolbox, in my professional toolbox, and then my heart knowledge, that love that I have for my grandma, that's my personal self. And you think about your own families too, but let's talk about the dying process, okay? I'm before I get into this, I'm gonna share, because I knew that time was, and she was telling me, but this video, this recording that I'm gonna let you hear, my grandmother lived 2 years after that, but still, this is the journey as she really started to deteriorate in her physical body, that we start to see this. And I say that because I never knew that I would be using this, but I'm thankful that I can, and I'm hoping, I want you to listen. I'm hoping I can. I think I got it up loud as it'll go. And let me see if I can. Now, this is an interview, not an interview, as my grandmother, was sick, and you can tell, and I'm hoping you can hear this. So I don't know where's the speakers on this thing, but I want you to listen, and then we'll get into our next slide. Let me see. Oh Lord, that's it. Hold on. As we get into this slide, I want you to be able to hear me, and I hope you can hear. Master says over. It's over. Master says over. It's over. Now who right or wrong? Right. I ain't listening to that. I ain't listening to that. I didn't hear what you said. She said she didn't hear what you said.
You right, Miss May.
She said you right, Grandmama.
That's right.
But the doctor still want to look at your pacemaker.
Well,
are you being stubborn? I know what you're saying is right, Grandmama, but still, they still have to check it out.
well, they can check it in. But I don't want to become myself going in it for him to hold me on.
Ain't nobody
Him hold me on. You don't have to help.
You don't want no help holding you on.
No,
Grandmama, I don't want to talk about that.
I don't. Because the master done been good to me. He done brought me to 96 years. Ain't that good?
That's good.
I know I'm everybody. And I praise him every day for keeping me up. Now, give me some help.
Now, I can't tell you nothing else.
Yeah.
You don't shut me up.
But I know.
Okay. I hope that you can hear that. And I never, we know that we never know what you'll have in your toolbox, and never know when you'll use it. And again, she was 96 years old. My grandmother died when she was 98. Still in her right mind. But this conversation is about the dying process. And so to help you to understand, Diane is considering, turn to, I'm sorry, y'all, it just kind of messed me up. It turned to page 372 in your book. And we're going to talk about this and some of the things that she pointed out. And one of the first thing that I want you to know, dying is a process. And then, yes, sometimes people do it. But one of the things, it says dying is considering on time. And as you can remember, if you could able to hear in the video, that's what she was saying. We were at the hospital, and they were concerned that her pacemaker was not functioning like it was, and she was like, she's on time, she's on time, is on time. She was talking more about it, and I didn't want to hear about it. I didn't want to hear about it, but she talked more openly about death, and she talked about it, being really ready, that she praised her God about it, and that she was ready. She was ready, and we were not. So I just found that more interesting, that after that hospital visit, that I'm telling you, the next 2 years, even during the good times and all the times we were connecting and visiting, she talked about going home. We could be in the middle of a good time. I can remember after the tornado that hit Tupelo, I got her out, and I wanted to take her just so she could see, and I'm thinking, she could see the devastation, and then we could go to Sonic's and get her a pineapple milkshake, and I'm thinking, we're having the best time. It was good, and she was with me, and she would hold my hands, and then she would say, I ain't got much longer, and I don't want to be here no more. And I'm like, God, and so, they begin to talk open about it with everybody. And I cherish that whole video. That I saved a whole lot of them because, she was very important to me. And I'm so sorry. I am human. And I was going to try to use that to help you to understand that, like it's all right with them, people who have made peace with that. Dying is considered on time in very late hood, so it didn't matter, and you heard what she said on the video. I praise him every day, and she read it, and she didn't want us to interfere. She didn't want us to try to bring her back, didn't anything. She, and because I was the oldest granddaughter, she shared that with me and make sure I was the one to communicate that with everybody. There's a strong cultural predisposition toward denial of death. Some cultures, don't, they deny death, and they can deny it, but they can't stop it. But, they don't want to talk about it. And there's ways of speaking about death often reflect the culture and religious background that is passed away. For example, like she wanted to go home. She said, I want to, talk. She said she referred to him, and she's always the master. She said, I talked to the master, and that's something that she has instilled in all of us. But you will look on page, and there are some other things I want to share with you about the dying process. But on page 373. I want you to look at those stages of accepting and impeding death, and and this is very important. And this is Kubler and Raw stages of grief. You need to know those. You have denial, and they're on your PowerPoint, but you want to know some of them. Like, for example, denial. The person denies that death will occur, and this is not true. It can't be me. The denial is succeeded by temporary isolation and social interactions. So it's just denial, and then you get to the point of you anger. The individual may ask the person, project his or resentment and envy on someone else, or bargaining. They just, like, the individual start bargaining and attempt to postpone death with how they could. And then depression may set in because they know that they're dying, especially when they know it's coming. And then then that gets to a point where they totally accept it. They totally accept that this is my life, end of my life's journey. It's okay. I'm gonna be okay. And then as you can hear on that recording, that's I believe that's where my My grandmother was. I just think that it's important. I even got down and she's still teaching that. This is a picture of her, and I don't know if you can see that, and I'm not good at that, but her birthday was on November the 7th, and we had her birthday party. She went to sleep that night, and she died on after midnight on November the 8th. That when they made their rounds, she had gone home, and so that is very anyway. But when a person get to that point and they're ready, that they are ready. Okay, so you want to read and pay close attention to page 373 in your book. And y'all, that happened in 2015, and here it is 5 years later, and I'm really emotional about it to this day. But then let's turn to page 373, and we talked about advanced directives. Now, there's something I need you to know about that. Just a few things, and it's some on your advanced directives are documents that give instructions about desired health care in the future if the individual is unable to speak for themselves. Now, if that's advanced directives. And for example, she was telling the nurse who was in there, she was asking Miss Harris, "What do you want?" And you heard what she said. "I don't want y'all messing with me. Let me go on." And then, of course, you have the living will, and that describes the medical procedures and drugs and types of treatment that one would choose for oneself is able to do so, and that's the living will. And then, you have the power of attorney. And I want you to look over there because the 11 years that I worked in home and community based, a power of attorney only is good for where that person is living. And so, it gives someone else the ability to make decisions about them. When we talk about advanced directives, social workers can help patients and families with advanced directives. Really sitting down, talking to them about all the dynamics, whatever's going on in that environment, and a living will versus the power of attorney for health care. If you don't know a lot about the legal parts of that, it's always good to consult with an attorney. But the power of attorney is only as good when the person is living. A living will tells them, why they're living, and a lot of times you have to consider the ethical, racial, and ethnic, and the racial and the religious consideration when considering and talking about these advanced directives. And those are a lot of times. The thing about it, a lot of according to research, support a lot of African Americans and minorities don't have advanced directives, especially if they low income or uneducated. They just don't have an understanding of that and have not made those decisions that are needed to be made. Okay. And then you can find that on page 373 in your book. Now let's go for care of people who are dying. We're almost through. I think that I'm going to the care for people who are dying. I want you to look at your PowerPoints. They're pretty clear. There's not, just read. If you read your PowerPoint and look at your PowerPoints, you should be good. But there's a few things that I want to talk about on palliative care, on care of people who are dying. You have palliative care, and that's a form of care focusing on pain and symptom management as opposed to curing disease. That's just trying to make sure you keep somebody as comfortable as possible. You can find that on page 375. And then you got hospice as a model of palliative care, which is more philosophical care than place. And look on page 375, the keys to hospice care. And so you can look at that. And then I want you to turn with me, and you can read over this, the end of life signs and symptoms. Please be familiar with those. Read over those end of life signs and symptoms on page 376 in your book. And you can also, it gives you a lot of different things. And, this may not be typical of all people, especially if it's not, but we're talking about as people go through those stages of life. They might have deeper and longer periods of sleep. increased secretions in their mouth, bladder and bowel incontinence. There's a whole lot, but I want you to look on there on page 376. Be familiar with those and know that at the end of life signs and symptoms. And then look on then we're going to go to, we're almost through, on your loss and grief of bereavement, and that's going to be page 377. There's a few points I want to talk about. The challenges, the different aspects of process. You got loss, then you got bereavement, then you got grief, and you got mourning. And let me just tell you, there's no timetable on grieving and loss. Okay, loss is the severing of an attachment that an individual has with loved ones. Let me turn to. So let me look at this. It says loss, the severing of an attachment with an individual has with loved one, a loved object, or one's self or identity. That's considered loss. Okay. Then bereavement, the state of having suffered a loss. So loss, the severing, or this detachment of an individual has with it could be with a person or object or self or their own identity. Then grief, the normal reaction of an individual experiencing loss. And so grief does not necessarily have to be grief or loss of a person, but an object or anything. Mourning, and that's the extent, the external expression of grief, and that can be different in different ethnic group and races. So the thing that we, as the challenge for us as social workers, is not to stereotype or pathologize grief. Not to have that. That certain people have to do this, and people function different as they deal with grief. So I want you to know that. Look on page and then like loss, grief, and bereavement, people use those words interchangeable, but they're not. They're different, and they are similar, but they're different. So look on page 378 in your book. They're highlighted. You want to know that, and because I want to be mindful of our time as well. And then look on the 4 stages of grief. You will find that on page 379. You got the different theories and models. I want you to look at that. And then the cultural bereavement. We'll finish reading that. Suggestions. Look on the theories of model. I shared that with you. The 4 stages of models of grief. I want you to know that. And then the things about the cultural bereavement. Culture, difference, shape, mourning, rituals, traditions, and behavior, expression of grief. And we can talk about that on our Zoom call on Thursday. And it's necessary to know beliefs. As a social worker, it is very necessary to know beliefs, values, and customs of grief, loss, and bereavement. You need to know that, that different people. Think about an experience where, people just grieve different. Funerals look different. People have different ways. And then the life course completed. The responsibility to evaluate social institution for the ability to meet the basic needs of individual. That's what we're going to have to do as social workers. And one of the implications is to make sure that we are aware of the spiritual assessment, assessing impact of loss on clients, and assessing loneliness and isolation at this stage of development. Okay? So you will have to understand it. Make sure you read that. Make sure you have a good understanding of how important that is at each person. And I look forward to talking to you on Thursday. Make sure you have read and have a good understanding. And until then, we'll talk later. And I'll talk to you on Thursday.